Greetings, community. Adrienne's away at conference learning new ways to serve our clients even better. Today, we're revisiting a fascinating panel discussion from our vault that explores how HR professionals can become true strategic partners in their organizations. But before we jump in, let's frame the conversation through the lens of talent optimization, a critical framework that many organizations are missing today. Adrienne and I work together to help organizations leverage people data to drive the success in their business strategy. Think of talent optimization as the strategic alignment of your people strategy with your business objectives. It's like a well choreographed dance where your workforce capability, team dynamics, and organizational culture move in perfect sync with your business goals. When this alignment is off, the consequences can be severe. And that's exactly what we'll hear about in this clip from our conversation with Matt Poepsel, often referred to as the Godfather of Talent Optimization. And Matt talks about the real business costs of misalignment. And it turns out that most business problems are people problems in disguise. So talk a little bit about the damage that's done when we don't align our people strategy and our business strategy.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Tom. I mean, the reality is that in my experience, things that even look like business problems, technical problems, maybe there's a process that's not working well, a system that got misconfigured, well, there's always people behind it. And so what I start to say is that anytime you go look in the business, you're going to find one of three problems, in my experience, that are indicators that you have a gap and that talent optimization could help. The first is missed target. Anywhere you've got a dashboard on your business that's red or yellow when you wish it were green, there is a people contributing factor to that. Another is strategic risk. When you're a CEO and you're kept up at night just thinking, worrying about something that you need to happen 12 months from now, 18 months from now, and you just don't know if your organization can pull it off, that's an indicator that you have a gap in talent optimization as well. And the last one's the people tax. And this one's the most insidious of all. I like to say HR's got Kleenex in their office for a reason. And it's because people get frustrated. They're frustrated by competing goals. You know, they're frustrated by poor communication, poor decision-making, things that make my job harder. Somebody who doesn't understand me as a team leader, somebody who's not giving me a career path. What happens is it doesn't show up as directly as a red light on a dashboard, but think about the countless hours that are lost. Can you believe what they did over in marketing? I can't believe it either. All that stuff is a drain on the bottom line. So any of those three things, missed targets, strategy risk, people tax, those things happen if we don't take a talent optimization approach. They're all business problems, but they have a people-centric.
Those key indicators, missed targets, strategic risk, and that insidious people tax perfectly illustrate why talent optimization isn't just an HR initiative, it's a business imperative. And that brings us to our panel discussion from the vault. What makes this conversation particularly valuable is how these leaders connect challenges to practical solutions, from understanding business strategy at a granular level to zooming out to 100,000 feet and build strong business cases to help organizations face reality and thrive through their talent challenges. So let's listen to this conversation as their experts share their insights, and stay connected, stay in conversation. We'd love to listen with you.
This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation. Welcome, everybody. What a great panel we have today. We're discussing HR as strategic allies, and we've got so much expertise in our virtual room today. I'm excited to dig in. Let's begin with some brief introductions of your background and how that connects in with the topic, HR as strategic allies, and then we'll roll and start digging in. We already are going to pull some good stuff that we talked about in pre-show, and we'll bring it back and keep it going. So Jackie, you're the first tile I see, so why don't you open us up?
I see myself top right as well. So thanks. My name's Jackie Kovic. I am currently the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for a quantum computing company headquartered in Berkeley, California, Rigetti Computing. We went public in 2022, which was something on my bucket list. I wanted to go ring the bell. I got to do that. And by way of background, I did not come up through the HR ranks. I came up through procurement consulting, found that I cared a lot about people, got an MBA, and have been trying to marry my appreciation for people and how they drive business results while working in early stage companies where I can leave a mark. Thanks for having me.
Love it. Welcome. Ian, how about you go next? Welcome back.
Great to be with you. My name is Ian Ziskin. I'm the president of a consulting firm called Exec Excel Group. Have been in the HR and leadership game in one way or another now for about 42 years. The first 28 years of my career, I spent working for big companies, primarily in HR. Toward the latter part of my corporate life, I was the chief HR officer for two different companies. Most recently, a company called Northrop Grumman in the aerospace and defense business. And then about 14 years ago, I launched my own coaching and consulting firm, which is a portfolio of things. Suffice it to say, in my corporate life, as well as in my coaching and consulting life, I've been spending a fair amount of time over all these years helping to do the best job possible of connecting business strategy and people strategy and trying to help leaders be as effective as possible in their roles. Fortunate enough to have stumbled into a career that I've absolutely loved. I went to undergraduate school for business and got my master's in industrial and labor relations from Cornell right after that. As I was learning about each of the various aspects of business and how to run a business, I pretty quickly began to realize my real passion was around people and organizations, and so tested that a little bit by going and getting this master's degree from Cornell, but discovered pretty quickly that's where my passion was, and I've been lucky enough to be able to pursue it now for these last 42 years, as I was saying. Looking forward very much to the conversation about the topics we intend to cover today, and it's great to be with everyone. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Eric, bring us home.
Sure. My name is Eric Heeger, and I'm the CEO and managing partner of a consulting organization called TransformX Partners. My background originally was a combination of business psychology and neuropsychology. And so I practiced clinically for a number of years in the medical and healthcare space, and then eventually transitioned out and went directly into global consulting. And over years has gone by, I took more internal management than leadership than executive roles, up to global head of talent solutions for a Fortune company. And so my space, I've moved in and out of HR realms without ever really having direct training or ownership of core HR functions. So usually talent, strategy, succession, operations, performance improvement, efficiency and effectiveness work, and things that very directly connect people, performance, and culture. And so I've moved between strategy and operation functions primarily, and at times been almost corollary to HR or a direct bridge in leadership development and talent. So it's all of that had come together, and my firm is similar to some of our colleagues here, similar kind of expertise around leadership and executive development, and the rest of it around people, performance, culture, and resource management, meaning what do we do around business performance? Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for including me.
Wonderful. Well, it gives me pause to see the expertise in the room. So that's incredible. Like, let's dig in, right? Because this, with a title like HR as strategic allies, that's the elephant in the room, right? And we know this is probably a problem since the beginning of time, maybe, where we've heard HR say, we want a seat at the table. And so I'll open it up just to say, is it still an issue? But more so, what are the challenges specifically that we're seeing today? What keeps organizations from addressing this gap? Do I need to call on someone?
Well, you might. They're all being so respectful to one another. You might need to call on them.
Why don't
Maybe,
you go first? Okay, Eric, go ahead.
Eric, go.
well, I think in our title, I just want to call out maybe for us to consider that there are a series of assumptions that may or may not be safe to make. And this idea of being an ally presumes a service relationship that would be based on a general understanding. And I think the question that we might ask is understanding something like strategy even close to being enough to be considered not only an ally, to truly be an integrated partner in the actual performance of the business? And so if we're starting with a series of assumptions that often are not spoken in many organizations, we're operating from different places, from different perspectives, depending on our role, around who is supposed to be where and who belongs where and who adds or detracts value. And I just want to put that out on the table first, because I'm sure that all of us have a different experience of that, depending on which perspective you come from.
That's a very good distinction. Yeah, thank you for that. So we might even change the title of the talk. And so it really is about, if you think of the word corporation, it means a body. And so if you have a body, each part, each member has its own functions, but they're integrated. And so I like that framing. And the question that bears to mind, and I'm zooming way out, what on earth is a people strategy? You know, we throw words around like strategy and business strategy. People go to their key results and we really know what they mean. How are we going to achieve X? But what is a people strategy? And I'm going to ask that to Jackie, to start with Jackie on that.
Well, I really like, Eric, that you zoomed out on that, because before we joined in, I looked up the definition of a strategic ally.
Of course you did. Go, Jackie.
Well, and what I found is, right, two parties. So I take your point about the organizational body, Tom. But two parties who joined for mutual advantage, in our parlance, it would be a competitive advantage. And so I think that, to your point about strategy, I think that one also needs to understand how the operation or the organization executes. And so I think it's a lot about executional detail. Do you understand that in order to enable the people to be successful? And so I do think I have spent most of my work in consulting has been at the execution level, not at the strategy level. And I think that pays dividends when I can speak the language, understand. In my world, it's physicists with PhDs who talk about complex concepts. And the more that I can be ingrained in understanding their language and what it takes for them to execute, I think that's where our organizational competitive strategy comes from.
I'm really curious if I can, thank you, Jackie, if I can kick it back to Ian. This is, the difference between allyship, partnership, and leadership in strategy are profoundly different positions. And in most traditional larger corporations, particularly, the role of HR is service and support, and subservience and support. And so again, to try to make an assumption from an HR leader's perspective that some declaration that we are a strategic ally or partner, let alone a strategic leader, is a completely different, sometimes quite unwelcome mindset. So Ian, given the role as CHRO, how did you deal with that? What did that feel like as you saw the evolution of the role of the whole function?
Yeah, there's a couple of building blocks maybe we can start with, just to underscore some of the things that have already been said. at least based on my experience. One is stepping back to think about what is a strategy, and it's overly simplistic way of stating it, at least from my experience, is how do you help an organization win in the marketplace? And part of helping the organization win is figuring out what you're actually going to do, set of priorities, that you're going to focus on, but also what you're not going to do. Because I think an effective strategy is a combination of both of those things, what we actually will do and what we actually have chosen not to do. And when you overlay that with people strategy and the role of HR people in putting a people strategy together, one of the most important elements that I've seen, often skipped over, but I think it's the single most important thing we have to be good at as HR people, is understanding the value chain by which the business makes money. If you don't understand the value chain by which the business makes money, it is extraordinarily difficult to know as an HR professional where you're going to add value. And so to the point that both Jackie and Eric, you were making with different terminology, this idea of, subservience of the HR function or somehow being in service of, I think we are in service of, but we're not necessarily in service of everyone else. I think we're in service of what's the strategy, how are we going to win in the marketplace, and how are we going to distinguish ourselves from a people standpoint in executing on that strategy. And one of the fallacies that I often see is HR people getting very frustrated with not being included in the process, but they've skipped over themselves the most important aspect of being included in the process, which is being able to demonstrate that they understand the value chain by which the business makes money. If you don't start there, it's really difficult to know what to focus on from a people strategy point of view. So I'll stop there for a moment and see if anybody has any reactions to what I said.
I was thinking about what you said, Eric. I think I had two sort of perspectives on it. I have had the feeling and the experience of being, I think, viewed as subservient and subordinate. But what I like about what Ian also says is, I think that every function is in service to, right? I mean, even the financial function is in service to the broader organization, and they have to understand the strategic priorities. And so I just think that what we have traditionally felt like that we were experiencing is an orientation, maybe a little bit self-imposed. Maybe we have a little bit of a, psychological challenge ourselves, that every function is in service. But to be in service is not to be subordinated.
There's thank you for clarifying the next step. It's so much of the mindset and the self-limiting beliefs that come out of also a culture of being treated as a transactional expert tends to be the plague of a lot of early career, mid-career, true HR, human resource operations professionals. And the role of operations versus the role of strategy and leadership are not only a different mindset, it's a different skill set with a completely different pathway to understanding. And much as Ian said, in understanding the service value chain and the business of the business, it's more than an understanding. It's, can you contribute in a meaningful way as an equitable leader in a context of an enterprise that you will actually add something substantial as a business leader who happens to be running a specific discipline and function, as opposed to being branded and self-branding, I am an HR professional. Once you get out of that mindset to, I am a leader who happens to have domain expertise you have to establish respect and credibility to be able to add value, not just as a subject matter expert, as somebody who can critically think and strategically think and actually pick up part of the authorship of strategy, not just the recipient of strategy. It still puts you in a downstream position as an HR professional or an HR leader as being further separated from the authorship to being in the receivership mode.
Mhm.
And once again, we're reinforcing the whole dynamic of that relationship. And I think being able to really differentiate in that way, to not just complain about, I know that's a rough way to put it, to complain about not being included or being excluded, not at the table, is more a function, as Ian said, of what have you done to earn the right to participate in a way that people really want you there and that you are intentionally invited, not that you have to force your way to be included. And that's just a very different mindset than I deserve or I should be at the table.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You
This,
remind me of something. It's difficult to see beyond our own expertise, to see beyond it, as well as it's difficult for others to see us beyond. So using Block's model, if you are an expert and you're seen as an expert, they're only going to come to you for that functional expertise. I've seen that with developers, not just human resources professionals. They have a similar experience. They only come to me if there's code involved. And just what you were saying, Eric, is they're not seeing beyond it anymore than the people that they work with. And you reminded me of something Ian said before, so I will turn it over to Ian. He had said this before about being able to see up and out as well as down and in. I got that from you, so I'll let you address it first about how do we get out of that mindset, which it does take a lot of energy to be that expert. And we can't have HR professionals not being an expert, but it's hard to get out of it for themselves as well as for their counterparts.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Tom, because in my experience, I've seen most HR people get to where they've gotten to over the course of their careers by being deep experts down and in the organization. They know the culture, they know the people, they know who hates whom, they know where all the skeletons are buried in the organization. That gives them a certain amount of relevance and authority and credibility because they know a lot about what's going on in the organization. And I would be the last one to suggest that that's not important. I actually think it's extremely important for HR people to be knowledgeable about and really good at all of those things. However, I would also say it's not enough. It's insufficient. If you're wanting to, grow to a place or go to a place as a emerging HR leader that has the kind of credibility and relevance that we're talking about and is not feeling subservient or, underappreciated or undervalued, I think you also need to be good in addition to the internal down and in stuff. You have to be good at the up and out and across kind of perspective that comes from understanding what's going on in the external environment outside of your own company and industry, because that's where actually a lot of the big transformational change and trends come from. They basically attack your organization, from the outside. And the question is, are you aware enough to see those things coming? Most HR people, with all love and respect to all my colleagues, aren't great at that, at least not yet. So an area to improve, anybody who's listening to us who is thinking to themselves, how do I get better, as an HR leader? One of the ways you can get better is to actually be much more savvy and knowledgeable about what's going on outside of your own organization, because that's where most of the impetus for change and competitive challenge comes from. The second place where I think you can get a lot better and therefore add more value is working across, more collaboratively outside of the silo of the HR function with all the other functional areas and areas of expertise within your organization. Why do I say that? Because at least in my experience, most of the things we're being asked to address these days as HR professionals are big, hairy, complex, multidisciplinary, cross-functional in nature. And, if you grew up as a a highly focused, disciplined HR professional who down and in knows HR really well, but doesn't know anything about anything else and isn't good at collaborating with people from those other functions, it's really hard to be effective. My analogy for all that, I like to think of it as, HR as orchestra conductor. My way of describing that to people is, most orchestra conductors are not an expert at playing the flute, the violin, the timpani, and all of the other instruments that make up for an orchestra. Their job is to go out and find the very best musicians in the world who are expert at those particular instruments, bring it all together and create beautiful music. I think increasingly that's what HR people need to become good at and comfortable with, is solving organizational problems that are multidisciplinary and cross-functional by being able to be the integrating point that brings all of those different perspectives together. So that would be a second area where if people who are listening to us would say, how can I be more effective as an HR leader? The better you are at working cross-functionally and multidisciplinary approaches to things with your colleagues, the more you will distinguish yourself and the more effective you'll be at driving strategy and driving change and not being viewed as subservient or just a support function.
If that's great, if I can riff on that, Ian, to take something from your point one, and then I'm setting this up for Jackie, if you don't mind, is because Jackie, you still have an internal role. And Ian, you were talking about looking out, and looking out presumes a level of proactivity that is very different than the typical reactivity, right? And so, Jackie, do you find in your role that you and your teams are typically more reactive or responsive or proactive? Where does the HR function sit in the context of the business? Like, what's a more typical stance?
In our organization, I'm probably fortunate to be at a place where we are more proactive. And I would agree with Ian in terms of looking out. So I'll give an example. The last week I was in the UK. I went to their National Quantum Computing Center. I met with the head of that computing center, and we talked about, mutual opportunities. I was, present for those conversations. Those kinds of conversations, when you're present and you understand, right, allow you to go back inside and then plan for, what does this mean for us? And so I think that you've got to seek those out, those opportunities. And I would agree with Ian that, I see a lot of HR professionals hang out with other HR professionals. And I don't find those to be super enlightening engagements generally. I think if you want to be really smart about it, go to a CFO conference or an economics conference, or go understand something about, manufacturability or, product development, because those are the people, when Ian says work across, you have to speak their language in order to be able to deliver value for them. So I see a lot of HR professionals. Recruiting, I would say, is one of my fortes. And the folks that I select versus the others that get selected, I think are different, because I understand the nuance of what's required to do the work and to execute.
It's so interesting because no, it's perfect, because I think it's a tactile example, right? Of what can anyone listening to this think of or consider as an option to do. And it's really interesting, and I'm wondering if you all would agree with this. A lot of the language in strategic HR and talent succession has been, the most successful leaders of the present and future are going to be the most diversified and the ones with the broadest set of experiences to bring to bear. And what's ironic about that is that, candidly, and as Ian said, with all love and respect to our HR colleagues, they're often not very diversified. And so if that's the quote unquote advice we're giving to help other leaders expand and rise, and we're not doing that in our own domains with our own people, what else should we expect? So, that's a very difficult thing then, when we try to invest in our own function and our own people's development and have to secure specific resources for that, do we have the support and sponsorship that we need to be able to really execute on that equitably? That's not always the case. And I'm wondering if you've dealt with that through your career, or how you negotiated that to make sure that there was equity in that level of distribution of resources.
Well, maybe I'll start by saying that, it's been my experience more often than not that there wasn't equity in the distribution of resources. And oftentimes, being asked to do things that were, almost impossible to do with the level of resourcing that was, expected or provided. So it oftentimes puts you in the position of having to fight for and defend what your resource needs are in order to get these things done. But I use those terms not coincidentally. I think if you're going to be viewed as a leader, whether you're an HR leader or any other kind of leader, you have to be okay with the idea of fighting for and defending and explaining and making a business case for certain things that you need in order to get them done. If you're the type of person who's easily frustrated by the fact that, my CEO doesn't love me, or I'm constantly fighting with my CFO because I don't have enough budget money to do the things that the organization is asking of me. And because you're frustrated, you kind of go back to your office and sulk a little bit. I think you'll find it's a lot harder to get your job done. And then it just becomes a negative cycle, where you're frustrated, therefore you're not getting things done the way you should, and therefore the organization is not investing in you. So it's kind of a vicious circle to some degree. So I have seen, but this is true for myself in terms of my own approach to things, but also highly effective HR leaders that I've been around, and I've worked with many of them, are really good at putting a business case together, advocating for themselves and their organization, being realistic about what it's actually going to take in terms of resources and talent to get certain priorities accomplished from a people standpoint. And the people who are good at doing that oftentimes, are persuasive. They make the case and the organization says, yes, you're right. And, we'll give you the resources you need, or at least, 50% of the resources you need as opposed to zero. And you have a halfway decent shot at getting things done. If you're sitting around waiting for permission, waiting for somebody to love you, waiting for somebody to hand you a bunch of money to get stuff done, you probably will be waiting for a long time, even in those organizations that are, more predisposed to supporting HR related kinds of things. Why? Because everybody else is competing for the same resources, and there's a zillion other priorities that if you're the CEO, for example, you're having to juggle and reconcile all of those different competing priorities. So if you're not willing to advocate for yours as an HR leader, it's highly likely that that money and love and attention is going to be placed elsewhere.
I want to underline,
that-
even though you
Oh,
said
go
it,
ahead.
for leaders, this conversation is for HR leaders, but for all leaders to get a better job. We're all fighting for resources, doesn't matter which function you're in, of making a business case for what we're doing. That's something that applies to any listener, and not just in HR. And I know in my experience with my own little thing, I throw resources at things all the time that I don't make to my own CEO, which is me. What is the business case for what you're doing? Adrienne, you and I have done a couple of those. It just seems like a cool thing to do. Well, that's not I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I might as well learn from my own podcast. It's like to be able to make the business case. And that makes us better, whether we're brand new or seasoned vets, of understanding the yes and around it.
Yeah, if I could just add
Wait.
one caveat to that, just to bring an element of reality, for anybody who's listening. Just because you're effective at putting a good business case together, it doesn't guarantee 100% that your CEO or your operating leader who you're trying to convince is going to say yes. However, if you're not good at putting a business case together and you're not willing to advocate on behalf of your organization, there's pretty much a 0% chance that you're going to get what you're looking for. So if you want to put yourself in the position of having at least a 51% chance of persuading somebody of something, I think you have to go through the effort of not justifying your existence, but justifying why are we going to make this particular investment in this particular initiative, and what difference is that going to make to the business and the strategy that we're trying to execute on. If you're pretty good at that, you'll win more often than you'll lose. I mean, nobody has 100% track record of convincing everybody that they should do things, least of all me. But it has been my experience, if you're willing to put yourself out there and fight for what you believe in, you have at least a 50% chance or better of convincing somebody that the argument you're making makes sense.
It's learning a language, right? It's you need to speak the language of the recipient who you're trying to influence.
Yeah,
Well,
very much.
a business case,
But-
you know, I sorry, did I cut you off?
No, that's okay. Please go ahead. I've got a question, but
you
go
know,
ahead.
Well, Ian started with what brought those two words into the mix of business case, and those are two words that candidly terrify most, you know, support function professionals, particularly in HR. It is not part of the standard training career path preparation.
That's
And
right.
so this whole idea of even fighting and competing, let alone building advocacy, is not a skill set that is normally developed. So I think the next question for us, maybe on behalf of the listeners' benefit, is if you need to learn a language to communicate to others in a way they'll understand by way of this vehicle, the thing called a business case, how does one learn to do that? From within like an HR career path.
That ties into the question I had in my mind. Was we've talked a lot about the responsibility being on the HR professional doing things differently. What's the responsibility on the CEO to advocate for the HR professional being capable of doing things differently?
And
Right.
developing that skill if they don't
Developing that
they have the
skill.
heart set and the mindset, but they don't have the
Yeah.
skill set. Are you just going to say you don't have it, or are you going to be
Right.
part of? That's a great question.
We're telling HR people, go learn this other thing that you didn't learn traditionally, right? Well, hey, CEOs, how about you help them learn? I don't know, wild.
I'll tell you an experience in a minute I'm having with that, you know, as we speak, but maybe it looked like Jackie maybe had something she wanted to add. So I'm going to pause for a second.
Sort of chuckling because I agree with that a little bit. Adrienne, I think it's where we need to be. So it took me a second because I was oriented to the group that is here. But if I am earlier career HR, you know, to your comment, Tom, about those that write software code, we go to them for software code. And sometimes we have to take our own blinders off and we talk about development and talk to them about career path and how we get more value out of them. We have to teach them, you know, peripheral skills. And so I think that organizations have to think about that for all functions, and that's inclusive of HR. If you want a better talent leader, you have to help them develop that skill. If there's a CHRO at you know, the helm that can assist with that and facilitate and lobby for that, great. But yeah, I mean, this is back to your comment, Eric. Like we shouldn't be subordinated to the rest of the organization. We all have to grow together.
And I'd argue that the other those in the C-suite, right? There's some people strategy learning that would benefit them as well, right? I think we had a guest who said that, hey, flip this, right? It's that teach the HR people business, to teach the business people HR a little bit, right? I've got a short story. I have a client that I work with, and they were without a CHRO for a while, and a smaller company, and so not too small, but and so the CEO stepped in as the CHRO. Let me tell you, by doing that for like a year, he realized what he didn't know, right? So now he's a stronger advocate for people strategy because he's like, yeah, okay, I see it, I get it.
I love that.
To have that level of reciprocity, though, we really need to have a level of mutual respect. And the mutual respect ends up being based on, so let's go back to right? Our central topic of HR professionals as strategic allies, partners, et cetera. And so when I was learning how to build a business case and when I was exposed to it, I never learned that from HR people. It never came from HR. It always came from finance and operations. And the people who were the inherent writers of that code, right? That was a language where they could help all the other folks understand what is it that they need to see to be able to understand, let alone support and advocate alongside. And that's where there wasn't always a whole lot of cross-pollination, as opposed to, quote unquote, go make a case, go write a business case, put a proposal together. And then the answer was either right, no, it's not good enough, it's missing. And you end up with round after round after round of rework and revisions because there was no proper guidance in the first place. And so that is a frustrating downward spiral for everybody involved, instead of elevating everybody to a real conversation to build capability and capacity in the business. And the question is whose advocacy does that begin with? Who takes the agency to build those skill sets by way of what experiences? And that's not an easy thing to answer when particularly you find that a lot of HR people in a broad generalization are extremely busy, on the defensive, trying to manage a backlog, and are buried under task dumping, things that have to get done. And so to even elevate them to the point of having more, to even having access to think about and begin to understand strategies, still steps removed from those who can actually contribute to and create strategy. Not the people strategy, the broader level of strategy.
I'm going to probably date myself a little bit, but growing up as a kid in the New York area, there were a lot of commercials on TV by an organization called Size Sims, who sold suits, men's suits, primarily. And
I remember
the crux of those commercials, as Eric might remember, is an educated consumer is our best customer.
Is our best customer.
And so I've actually tried to apply that theory, in working with not only HR leaders, but more importantly, non-HR leaders. So a lot of the time I've spent over the course of certainly the last 10 or 12 years is working with a lot of people leaders outside of the HR function around the capabilities that they need in order to be more effective people leaders, and equally important, what they should be expecting from the HR people that they partner with, all with the idea of raising the bar on people's level of expectation about what they should be getting out of HR. And again, with all due love and respect to colleagues in the profession, if you end up discovering after you're a bit more enlightened about what you should be getting from HR that you're not getting it, you should fire those people and get some people who can actually deliver more value, or at least at minimum, help the people who are there, if you think they're worth investing in, become more effective. Where this has really hit home with me more recently, over the course of this past year, I started teaching an MBA course at my undergraduate alma mater, a place called Binghamton University, which is focused on people and HR leadership and their connection to driving business performance. And the thing that's been most educational about this, aside from spending a lot of time with 25-year-olds, is that most of the people in the course each semester are not, by definition, people who are planning to go into HR. They're primarily finance and accounting and marketing and operations and supply chain and analytics kind of people. However, trying to open their eyes a little bit to what it takes to be an effective people leader and what they should be getting out of HR people that they're ultimately going to be partnering with as they move into senior leadership positions in their careers has actually been not only fun, but also very rewarding, because I think what it starts to do, even though it's a small group of people, is to create a higher level of expectations that non-HR leaders should have of the HR people that they're working with. And so, it's Ian doing that, in small buckets with small groups of people. But I think if we could replicate a bit that mindset of how do we not only level up the capability of HR people, and we should, but also the CEOs and the senior leadership team members and the other operating leaders who are working with HR people, the higher expectations they have about what they should be getting out of HR, the better the chance that HR people will actually scramble and catch up to the extent that they need to in order to meet those expectations. That actually gives me a lot of confidence that the profession will continue to be headed in the right direction if we're also able to bring operating leaders along with us to realize, yes, we should be getting more, and these are some ways that HR people can better contribute and better be allies to business strategy and delivering business performance.
I have bad news for you, which is that we are running out of time. It's a good thing you didn't have a hard stop there, Eric, because this is really a dynamic conversation. And I think we're left with some things specifically we can do wherever we are in our career, which was the goal of the conversation, to identify the challenges and say what we can do. And I really love the idea, and Eric brought it to the table, and Jackie and Ian both underlined it, is approach people with the respect, set the bar high, but then jointly create a path to get there. Sometimes we set the bar high and then we say, well, you don't meet it, but we don't give them a path to get there. And I think if we will do that, everybody's game is elevated. And so I think we could just go around the tiles just with sort of a closing comment, but I think we're left with some specific things to do, which we'll highlight in the notes. But just thank you to all of you, and sort of a parting word. Eric, you want to start?
Sure. Just something occurred to me, and again, thinking about our listeners, and this came out of what Jackie and Ian were reflecting on. If we've developed a reputation for bringing expertise and information, how do we elevate that to really providing deeper insight and leading innovation? And that's the crossover between being that subject matter expert and a true valued contributor to a much broader business leadership conversation.
Jackie?
I was thinking about the earlier comment about fight for budget, not always handed the resources. I frankly like constraints. I think it forces creativity. And so to the extent that we find ourselves constrained, use it to your advantage, get creative. And we didn't talk about, the search and job match process for HR professionals, but if you truly want to learn fast, I would join a competitive space. Because to Ian's point about outside, you will have keen opponents who will be looking to outmaneuver you. And so you'll learn a lot from that.
Ian, bring us home.
Yeah, last thought I'll offer, actually, Tom, goes back to some of the work we've done together on leading transformational change. One of the big lessons for me, not only in writing a book about it, but kind of living that, has been HR people can really add a lot of value if they help the organization become better at defining reality and then facing it, because most organizations are pretty good at denying, dismissing, deflecting facts or data that do not reinforce their preferred view of the internal or external environment. So there's a certain skill set, it's almost a cultural capability that effective organizations have, which is allowing and insisting on external realities and forces of change and various trends to seep into the organization. HR people can actually add a tremendous amount of value in helping organizations and leaders be better at that, seeing reality and then doing something about it. So again, to our listeners, if you're looking for ways to distinguish yourself as an HR leader, the better you are at helping the people around you define reality and then deal with it, the more effective you will be seen, I think, as an HR person as well.
And we will put a link to the secret sauce of leading transformational change. But to that point, the framework from lots of different perspectives is not just identifying the reality, but what we can specifically do about it. And I think that's a good framework for all of us in whatever our challenges are, to get to the point where there's something we can do about it. Otherwise, you get in this cycle, which we mentioned in the opening, of we're all just griping about something.
All this
Adrienne,
practical
any-
advice gives me hope. That's what I'd say.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, all of you, each of you, for joining us. Great
you.
conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.